Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us for today's webinar, Toronto's Lost Bricks, Improving Deconstruction and Reuse. My name is Shalika Sivathasan, and I am the Administrative Assistant in the Continuing Education Department at the OAA. We will begin today's webinar by acknowledging the land on which we are meeting and calling in from. For millennia, the place we call Ontario has been inhabited by Indigenous peoples and nations who have been stewards of the land and who are deeply connected to its rich cultural and natural landscape. We would like to invite you in a moment of reflection to acknowledge our shared responsibility to address past and present injustices and provide space for Indigenous knowledge and worldviews to shape the architectural landscape of Turtle Island. Before we begin, I would like to share some important information to ensure an effective and professional webinar experience. Please be informed that this session is being recorded for quality and educational purposes. For accessibility, we provide automated closed captioning service available in multiple languages to accommodate the needs of our diverse audience. In order to maintain a stable internet connection, we have muted all participant microphones and disabled video feeds. Kindly note the chat function has also been deactivated. However, we do highly encourage engagement through the Q&A window, which you will find at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to submit any questions you have for our speaker there. Questions will be addressed during the designated question and answer period at the end of the presentation. For those seeking continuing education learning hours, please note that attendance is crucial. A minimum of 80% attendance is required for these hours to be accredited to your OAA transcript. Please allow just a few weeks for the, 4 days for the processing and reporting of these hours. And lastly, please note that the presenters do not provide insurance, legal, or practice advice, and the OAA does not bear responsibility for errors or omissions in discussions during the webinar. Now, I'm very excited to introduce our speaker for today, Daniel Arellano. Daniel is a heritage mason by trade and history and architecture enthusiast by study, working to preserve the value of historic buildings and materials throughout Ontario through restoration work and masonry material salvage. Driven by circular economy principles, he launched Arcana Materials to divert valuable brick and stone from landfills while meeting a growing demand for reclaimed materials, and has become an expert on material reuse with a unique perspective on deconstruction, viability, and product development. So please join me in welcoming Daniel Arellano.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks again for having us. This is a unique opportunity for us. It's not every day that a humble bricklayer gets to speak to an organization of architects. So we're really grateful for the opportunity. Also want to take this moment to thank our friend and colleague, Martín Contal. He's been a champion of ours and has been really supportive of our endeavor here with restoration and material reuse. And he's the one who pushed us to apply for this speaking opportunity. So thank you, Martín, if you're here. So we're going to be speaking today about our efforts in the deconstruction and salvage of historic masonry materials in Toronto and beyond. Here's just a quick schedule about how we're going to be speaking about these things today. So first and foremost, we're going to start with an introduction about Arcana Restoration, Arcana Materials, who we are, what our background is, what we do. Then we're going to transition into kind of how the state of circularity is in Toronto from our perspective. So we are one of several actors who are playing a part in kind of moving the field forward. And we're going to be talking about, from our perspective, what that looks like. Then we're going to be spending the bulk of the talk on a case study, which is the Danforth Baptist Church deconstruction and salvage. This was a really fun project that we've been working on for the past year. We're going to spend the bulk of the talk here, and then we're going to get into some more case studies of additional deconstruction projects, methods, and then lessons learned and some conclusions, and then we'll transition to the discussion and question period. So about Arcana Materials. So I started Arcana Restoration in 2019. Previously, I'd worked for another heritage restoration masonry firm for 6 years. I moved to Toronto in 2013, and I pursued I wanted to pursue the trades. I wanted to work in masonry, but specifically, I wanted to work in heritage restoration. I'm a history graduate. I've always been passionate about uh, heritage, and materiality has been really important to me throughout my career. So working in the trades and in heritage was the obvious path forward for me. So in 2019, started Arcana Restoration. It was just one man in a truck and grew fairly steadily through the pandemic. In 2022, we partnered with Johnson Playfair Masonry, which some of you may have had experience working with. They are a established high-end custom masonry firm, and we partnered together to be able to grow Arcana. And grow we have, and so now we're at the point where we have between the two companies 25 plus employees. And in that employee pool, we have a fairly high journeyman to apprentice ratio, which is uncommon in the field, but allows us to do really high-end work, both in custom new build and also heritage restoration masonry. So we're a relatively small company, but we can actually take on larger projects than you might think because of that shared labor pool. Um, so since 2022 and that partnership, we knew that we wanted to get more into heritage restoration, but heritage material salvage and sale. And I'll speak a little bit more about our own use of heritage materials, reclaimed materials in our projects. But in 2024, we decided to really professionalize how we approach material restoration and sale, and material salvage and sale rather. And that's where we established our Arcana Materials company, and we hired an in-house creative manager and really put a lot of resources into taking it to the next level, which we'll get into next. So these are some more examples of our work in the GTA and beyond. These are some residential restoration projects, which you might recognize. There's also a commercial restoration project in Port Hope on the bottom left there. And these are all projects where we have used reclaimed materials extensively. And so this is really how it all began, is that to do high-end, high-quality heritage restoration, conservation, preservation work, you really need to be using the proper materials and methods. So for us, that means using reclaimed materials, period-appropriate materials, sympathetic materials, wherever possible. And we recognize that there was an opportunity in that the larger market for these materials didn't really exist. You might be able to find them on Facebook Marketplace or Kijiji here and there, or other heritage masons might have their own stockpile, which they would typically keep for themselves and then maybe sell off if they had extra. But we realized that we couldn't always find what we needed. And we were having to kind of scour online and then speak with our colleagues to find what we needed for certain projects. And then we realized that there's an opportunity here, not only for ourselves, but for the greater market and for our colleagues and competitors to have better access to high quality reclaimed materials. So even though there are competitors, we really want everybody to be raising the bar when it comes to heritage restoration work, because that's better for the industry. It's better for everybody. It's better for heritage. These are some more examples of our work. And again, these are all projects where we used reclaimed materials extensively. Some before and afters here in Cabbagetown, Riverdale, the Annex, and East York. These are a few of our services that we offer and the good people that offer them. So you can see that we do traditional tuck pointing, we do non-abrasive steam cleaning, as I've mentioned, heritage restoration, masonry, and new build. And if you ever need any of these services, please feel free to reach out. So this is a project that we're really proud of in the Annex that we completed mostly in 2023 and then leading into 2024. It's a large Annex style single family home that underwent a massive restoration, renovation in those years. And again, this is a project where materiality was front and center. So we needed to find bricks for this project, and we really had a hard time doing it. There was nothing that really matched properly in terms of the size, especially. We could maybe find a new brick that would match in terms of the color range, but the size was it was impossible to match. And if we tried using a new brick to match it, it would look terrible. So what we did here is we ended up taking down two chimneys that needed to be rebuilt anyways. They were in really poor condition, but we put a lot of effort into the salvage of hundreds of bricks from these chimneys. We cleaned them and then we reused them in other parts of the project for repairs and alterations. And that was how we were able to do a really high-end restoration here, was by using materials from the site because we didn't have an option to find them elsewhere. So also really interesting here is the stone. So the stone was an Amherst red sandstone, which some of you may have experience with. So Amherst red sandstone is really beautiful. It's from Amherst, Nova Scotia. The quarry no longer exists, so you can't get this stone anymore. But it also happens to be quite porous, quite soft. So it's not really appropriate for our climate, unfortunately. And so in this case, over the course of 140 years of this building's life, it had really degraded to the point where these sills and lintels and chimney caps couldn't be salvaged, it couldn't be repaired. So we had to replace them all. So you can see in these photos here, these are some process photos and before and afters of this project. We worked with the architects and designers and the homeowners to choose a stone that would be appropriate for this project. And you can see in the bottom photo in the bottom where we have samples from a stone supplier. They ended up going with a English sandstone called Cove Red, which is supplied by Traditional Cut Stone, and it matched the Amherst Red as closely as possible. So in this case, because there were no local materials available, be it local Ontario or even Canadian materials that would match, we had to go far afield, so across the Atlantic, to get a stone that matched. And in this case, it was the right call because it was the most appropriate color and material match for the heritage building. You can also see the terracotta on the bottom right. So this is a really fun part of the project that I'm really proud of, actually, is that the two gables, one on Walmer and one on Kendall Road, they had terracotta tiles that were actually two different types. There's a rounded bottom and then a squared bottom. There was a lot of carpentry work that had to be done in and around this area, so all of the tiles were carefully salvaged by ourselves. At the time that we salvaged them, the design team didn't know that they were going to reuse them in the build, so they wanted to just throw them all out, but we put a lot of effort into carefully salvaging them all. And then we held on to them for a year, and that's the photo in the middle here. You can see us removing them tile by tile and putting them in a crate. So we held on to these for a year and cleaned them, and then eventually reused them in the building. And where we couldn't find local replacements for the missing tiles, we cast new tiles to match. And you can see in the top left photo, that's the result. So moving on, this is another project, commercial project in Port Hope called the Walton. This is again a large project where materiality was kind of front and center. This brick was from 1870 and it was gorgeous. You wouldn't know it because of all the paint on the building. So that was our primary scope of work, was the non-abrasive steam cleaning to remove layers upon layers of paint. I think there were 6+ layers dating back from the 1920s on this building. So when we finally got the paint off, we were able to get a true sense of the scope of work on this project. And there was a lot of deterioration, a lot of decay, and a lot of previous unsympathetic repairs. So thankfully, in this case, we had bricks from the building that were previously salvaged from previous deconstructions on the site. So we had hundreds of bricks that were stored indoors in the building to choose from. So our teams quality sorted and graded, separating out interior bricks from exterior grade and B grade from A grade. And the A grade exterior bricks were reused in the repairs that you can see here. We also had fun with mortar matching. This is something that we do on every one of our projects, but this one had a really beautiful, unique mortar that had a lot of lime chunks visible in it. So in this case, we used a lime putty and pozzolanic hydraulic lime blend, as well as some dye to closely match the mortar, and it turned out really well. So this is our first poll here, which I'll read out, and I think is going to be available as well. Yep, there it is. So what's your experience with specifying reclaimed materials? Have you successfully, I've successfully specified reclaimed products and they were used in a project. B, I've specified reclaimed products, but they were not available for the project when needed. C, I'm interested in specifying reclaimed products, but I'm unsure how to do so. D, I don't believe that reclaimed products are worth specifying in designs. E, other. Um, so, let me that. You see that? Okay, interesting. Okay, so moving on. So far we've talked about, from our perspective, why heritage masons and people working in the trades, heritage trades, might want to um, be reusing reclaimed materials. Um, but when we were launching Arcana Materials, we needed to do a business plan and really understand what the greater market, why people other than us might be interested in these products. So we came upon a few reasons. So first of all, maybe a client might want exclusive and rare historic products, something that you can't find anywhere else in the market, that you can't find them off the shelf, that this is really something special that you're looking for. Alternatively, they might want something with high production quality that was produced locally with local materials, and that's often the case. People come to us wanting a Don Valley brick, something that's going to match their home, or something that they know was produced locally, historically. They might also want it for aesthetic reasons. So whether it's got historic appeal or patina, something that looks real because it is. It's not faked. Um, there's also the sustainability component. So reclaimed brick, we've done a study actually in 2020, which is also available on our website, where we found that reclaimed brick uses 79% less, has a 79% less carbon footprint than a alternative such as Ibstock brick, which is widely used in heritage restoration. So Ibstock is an English brick that matches Ontario brick in terms of color, porosity, performance, and general size. So it's widely used, but of course comes with a much higher carbon footprint than a locally sourced option. And then there's collaborative customization. So we'll get into this a little bit in some coming slides. But we've had several designers and architects reach out to us, interested in the material, but mostly been interested in the ability to collaborate with us in terms of the customizing of that material. What if it's a brick or a stone that is beautiful but has more potential beyond that? How can we modify it or manipulate it to get more out of it? And like I said, we'll get into that a little more. And then alternatively, competitive pricing. So we found in order to kickstart the market, we need to really be offering these materials at a price that makes sense for people. So we're doing that, and it means that our margins are not what they should be or not what they hopefully will be. But it's a way that we need to really kind of like edge into the market. So we'll get into the pricing again a little bit further. So this is a simple visual about how masonry works in the circular economy. And uh, pardon me. And again, we're going to get into a lot of this a bit further, but this is just a simple way of understanding how modular bricks can be reused as bricks. And if they can't be reused, what else can they be? And here's a better visual explaining the pathways of materials in deconstruction and reuse. So for us, the best case scenario is the deconstruction and reuse of these materials. That gives you the best yield, the best high quality materials, and allows these materials to live on in their intended form. If they can't be deconstructed, or if you're having to salvage from a like demolition site, you still have yield from that. It's not as good, but there are still opportunities there. And these are some of the things that we're exploring in our own research and development. So we reached our second poll, which I'll read out. What do you see as the biggest hurdle to overcome for circularity of building materials? Is it A, lack of incentives, B, the lack of supply, C, quality concerns, D, project deadlines, or E, lack of interest? That's interesting. So it's a pretty wide swath. Seems that everybody has opinions that it's all about the same, and it's true, really. Like these are the biggest hurdles. There are lack of incentives both for builders, architects, homeowners, or building owners. There is a lack of supply, mainly due to these other considerations. Quality concerns are definitely a factor. We get asked this a lot, actually, by architects and designers because you are specifying these materials, or you may be considering it, but you want to make sure that they're going to stand up, they're going to last. Project deadlines are definitely a factor. Uh, Deconstruction is not fast work, but it's definitely necessary. So we're trying to speed things up. We're trying to change how these things work. And then a general lack of interest. If you don't care, you don't care, really. But at the end of the day, I'm not going to convert everybody in this talk, and I definitely appreciate that. But I hope that I hope that I get a few more of you interested in these materials. Okay, so moving on. So this is kind of how things are in deconstruction and reuse in the circular economy with masonry currently in Canada and Ontario. It's a different story elsewhere in the world. Australia and Europe are miles ahead when it comes to this kind of thing for a variety of reasons. But currently in Ontario, there's anywhere in the world that has rapid redevelopment, clean fill and demolition debris has to go somewhere. Where does it go? We all see all of the bins leaving in truck by the truckload daily, and they're going somewhere. Now, for the most part, when it comes to masonry debris, they're going to fill sites. And a lot of the time, these are sort of unofficial dumping sites or gray market disposal sites. And this is often what we found is that it's done really quickly and really cheaply. And this is kind of critical. The fast and cheap is how current demolition operates. And that has made it harder for us to edge into the market and to convince people to do things another way, but not impossible. And we'll get to that in a minute. But really, this goes back to the lack of incentives and enforced mandates, really, is that if there exists this opportunity for people to quickly and cheaply get rid of materials to move on to the next phase of their project, they will do it because they're not incentivized any other way. So again, we're trying to sort of like offer people incentives, offer people alternatives that make sense without slowing things down, without really disrupting in a negative way the status quo. And then circularity theory is becoming more accepted, is becoming more mainstream, but still, when I speak to most people outside of maybe the heritage sphere and the architecture sphere, people still roll their eyes at me when I bring this up. But it is changing, and in the past 5 years especially, I've noticed a huge shift in how people understand these things. It's becoming much more mainstream. So, and again, there are some places in the world where this is way different. So Victoria and Vancouver have mandates when it comes to uh, the circular economy, and so in those cities, if you have a building that is, I believe, before the interwar period, you have to you can't just demolish and throw everything in the garbage. You have to do some level of recycling of historic lumber. That takes different forms, and it's not always perfect, but at least it's currently mandated there, and that's really what we need here to push things forward. So these are some more examples of how we work in deconstruction. Uh, we're going to get into a few more of these in detail, but these are projects that we've been working on with some collaborators. So Ouroboros Deconstruction, who many of you might know. These are some examples of projects where they brought us in as deconstruction assistants to help with the deconstruction salvage of masonry. And then there's also some of our own projects where we've been reclaiming brick, slate, stone. And then there are some demolition projects that we've been brought in on to salvage basically from a pile of demolition waste. So again, moving on, this is kind of how we source materials. So, and we're going to spend time on this case, the first case study here. That's the Danforth Baptist Church. That's going to be the bulk of our talk. So salvaging from mechanical demolition, not at all ideal, but very common. And it's been sort of a way for us to edge into the market and get known for this. The second case study is a sort of a hybrid of that, a deconstruction and demolition, where we have opportunity to do hand deconstruction salvage, and that has allowed us to get a much better yield. Case study 3 is the best case scenario for us. This is strategic deconstruction. And this is where partnering with Ouroboros Deconstruction has been really beneficial for us because they have been hired by a client to do a hand deconstruction salvage, and they get a 90% plus yield in that case of materials. And then we've been able to use materials from their projects that are in much better condition because they've been hand deconstruction salvaged rather than mechanically deconstructed. And then alternatively, there's also a larger network that exists that we will purchase from. So if a client comes to us and we don't have what they need, we will look within our network to try and find it for them. And there are sellers that have reclaimed materials in Ontario and beyond, and we partner with them to provide the market with what they need. So yeah, these are some more examples of what I was just describing, these deconstruction projects. So top left is a deconstruction project from Ouroboros, where we partnered to get Credit Valley sandstone and a lot of limestone feature stone. The middle is the Danforth Baptist Church, some more details of that and of the materials that came from that project. And the right is another collaboration with Ouroboros Deconstruction, where we were able to salvage 1890s Victorian red and tumbled brick for that project. And these are some more marketing images of those products. This is kind of how we're selling them on our website. Okay, so here we are. Case study of the Danforth Baptist Church. So Danforth Baptist Church was built between 1911 and 1931. The 1911 portion was an arts and crafts style wing of the building. And this is really, for me at least, what made this building special because arts and crafts style in ecclesiastical architecture is really uncommon. And for many of you know that the use of clinker bricks in arts and crafts style homes is really common. And for me, clinker bricks are a really unique, beautiful material that we don't get to see every day. So this project was flagged to us by a number of different people that knew what we were interested in, knew that what we were up to, saying, "Please get involved here. Can you try and reclaim some of these bricks?" So Assembly Corp is the developer of this project, and they built a prefabricated modular mass timber structure that was going to be placed inside the deconstructed or the demolished portion of this building. So it's going to be low-income seniors housing, which is great. We're super happy about this project. And the fact that we got to be involved in the deconstruction and salvage was really good opportunity for us. So it's been a year since we started this project. We got involved in June last year, and we'll be going through the process of that on the next slides. What we had to do logistically, what it cost us, what we've sold so far, and more importantly, what we've learned. Um, yes, so like I said, this project came to us from a number of different ways. People that know what we're into flagged it and said, please get involved. One of my partners lives nearby and knew about it. And we didn't exactly know how to go about reaching out to the clients, but I was given the CEO's email address and I wrote him an email at 11 p.m., which he responded to, thankfully. And by 7 a.m. the next day, I was on site and trying to make a deal with the demolition contractor to get involved and allow them basically to send us material from this building because unfortunately, by the time we got involved, it was the 11th hour. The building was already being demolished. They were about to start filling truckloads, and those truckloads were going to go to one of these gray sites that I mentioned before at an unbelievably cheap cost. So the only way that we could really convince the demolition contractor to work with us was A, that they had the CEO sending them an email saying, please talk to these people. I sanction this. And then we offered them an alternative to their demolition debris disposal, which was to send it to our yard, which was much closer than where they would have been sending it. So it allowed them to move much more material daily, which was an incentive to them. So over the course of 4 days, 3 to 4 days, we filled a quarter acre of our yard, which is up in Leaside on Industrial Street, with truckloads of this brick. We estimate it to be about 200 tons of material. And because we had the collaboration of the demolition contractor, in this case, it was the site super who was sympathetic, understood that what we were trying to do, and then realized that it would help him get his project done faster. We worked with him to ask him to send us clean loads. That is, loads that weren't run over and over by the excavator. So in this case, there were super tight lot lines. They didn't have any choice really but to put their excavator on top of a pile of brick that they had already demolished so that they could access deeper into the building. But what that means is that it's basically crushing all the material into rubble, but they sent us the cleanest loads that they could. So what does that look like when we receive it? So again, truckloads and truckloads of brick. Some of those loads were not very good, I'm going to be honest, and then others ones were quite clean. And in this case, the brick was really, really robust and strong, and was able to sort of withstand the abuse that the movement of an excavator and then a truck dumping did to it. So we took these loads and we hand processed them. That is, we sorted them on site. We picked through the piles with a team of people. We then quality graded them before we cleaned them. And the cleaning process is the removal of the excess mortar from the brick. So this is really critical to making them saleable and reusable as a building material. So as you can see in the top right, that's the Brick Recyc machine. This is the Quebec company that's developed this machine to quickly remove mortar from brick, and it speeds up the process. In this case, it was the perfect use for this brick because the mortar was relatively strong, and it allowed us to clean thousands of brick a day. There's other ways of doing this is the old-fashioned way where you can use a hammer and a chisel or alternatively an SDS drill with a chipper bit. And that's often how we do it. If we're using a soft mortar on a brick, we can do it by hand almost as quickly as a Brick Stick machine. So there's multiple ways you can do this. So the products that came from this church, we classify them in four different classifications. So there was the A grade, and that's the high quality brick that you can see on the top right here that has very few imperfections, no cracks, no chips. And then B grade tumbled, and so that is what you see just to the left of it. So these are bricks that are imperfect. They have patina, they have character. They might be a mix of interior brick and exterior brick. And then clinkers. So clinkers are the overfired, sort of grotesque bricks that were used as features in the 1911 wing. And we've separated all those out because they're special. And then finally, for the concrete bricks. So these are not special by any means. They're not really even beautiful, but they're unique in the sense that they're a historic concrete brick that has a size and proportion that is different. They're larger essentially than a modern concrete brick. So they're useful in terms of heritage restoration work where you're trying to match materials. So these all have different applications. There are pros and cons to all of them. How we've been marketing them is online on our website, on our Instagram, but also on marketplaces like Facebook Marketplace and Kijiji. And people have been coming to us from all avenues and for also very different reasons, actually. And I've been surprised a little bit about how much we've been able to sell of the B grade, the tumbled grade, because as a heritage mason, we wouldn't use those in our restoration work because they're inappropriate. They don't pass the test essentially. But people are using them in decorative feature walls, sometimes in landscape, and they're really attracted to them because we're offering them at a discount from the A grade. So financially, it makes sense to use this material. So this is something that is really fun. With the clinker bricks specifically, we thought, okay, like these are special. I love these. These are beautiful. Maybe there's some brick nerds in the room that would also love these, but the general public's not really going to get this. So like, what do we do with this material? What's the potential here for reuse beyond just a brick as a brick? So we started experimenting a little bit by cutting them into sections. We then squared those sections and then cut them into this tile, which we're calling cosmic tile. And then we partnered with a friend of ours, furniture designer Daniel Gruder, to make a submission for the Design TO Festival, which we called Renovatio ex Ruina, which is Latin for renewal from ruin, which is quite appropriate for what we're doing. And these are some shots of the process where we use the clinker bricks, cut them into tiles, which we're calling the cosmic tiles, and then we clad this bar in cosmic tile. And these are some more photos of that event. We held an event at the Ouroboros headquarters on the lakeshore, and it was really well received. So this is really like a symbol for us of what we're trying to do and a symbol of advocacy, really, that there is so much potential, lost potential often in these materials that we're trying to bring to the fore. And we're trying to get people, designers, architects, homeowners to think about these materials differently, to value them more so that we have more opportunity to deconstruct and salvage them, but more opportunity to reuse them. And this is a way of us kind of pushing the needle forward a little bit and have fun at the same time. So if a brick can't be a brick, or if a stone can't be reused as a structural unit, again, it shouldn't necessarily be garbage. My goal is to have no waste, period. I don't want to be paying to get rid of materials anymore. I want to be paid to get rid of materials. And so we're constantly doing research and development to try and find ways to do that. Gabion baskets are well known. They're widely used in landscape. And so we've been experimenting a little bit at our yard with waste material and trying to find ways to make it beautiful and functional. And this has been well received as well. And if the Gabion basket is an option, what else could we do? So we have mounds and mounds of this waste material from the Danforth Baptist Church specifically, but also some other projects, which was costing us a fortune, honestly, to get rid of. And I thought, this is a missed opportunity. We should be doing something with this. And so we've bought a little jaw crusher, and we are now crushing brick and stone into aggregate, which we are using for landscape applications, for ground cover, but also in other ways as well. Even dust, this is dust that was produced from a dry saw, so a vacuum saw, from cutting thousands of bricks for a project. We mixed this in with some lime putty and put it into a brick form and made some bricks. And you can see in the top right, they didn't really turn out very well. That's version one. But we're constantly developing. So version two is going to be much better. In any case, this is just fun, but it's a way of sort of thinking differently about materials and about waste materials. Um, this is not at scale yet. This is all just experiments at our yard, but we're finding that people are interested in this, and it's inspiring, I think, to other people to get involved. And we've had some interesting ideas come our way that we hadn't even considered, but what else we can do with this material. This is another fun one that we did recently for at the Ontario Natural Building Coalition conference in April. We made a experimental rammed earth brick, or rammed earth bricks, where we made forms out of reclaimed lumber from Ouroboros, and we used crushed and pulverized brick, stone, and concrete as aggregate, but also as dye, as color. The brick dust also acts as a pozzolan, which is interesting. So it has the potential for reducing the amount of stabilizer or cement that goes into rammed earth, which people are pretty excited about, because that then reduces the overall carbon footprint and adds to removes this material from landfill. So these are, again, ongoing experiments. We're partnering with some rammed earth professionals and designers, and there's more to come on this. Just keep your eyes peeled. Okay, so going back to the Danforth Baptist Church, what was the yield? What do we get out of this? So like I said, we got about 200 tons of mixed brick masonry rubble, 500 plus man hours. I think that's probably on the light side. It's still ongoing. So labor, it was incredibly labor intensive. And from that, we got about 3,000 clinker bricks, about 15,000 B grade or tumbled bricks, about 4,000 A grade bricks, 1,800 concrete bricks, and then dozens of cubic yards of the broken brick and rubble. So significant wastage in the rubble, significant time cost due to the mechanical demolition, but was it worth it? So the good news is that almost all of this is sold through the past year and through our marketing efforts. And there's been some really beautiful projects done with it, which we'll share as well on our website and Instagram. And most of this is going into contemporary design, actually. So not a lot of heritage restoration. For one, I think because this brick is quite uncommon, and is also quite robust. So I think people that have these homes, these buildings, aren't needing this brick for repairs because they're in such good shape still. So really the people who've been coming to us have been landscape designers, architects, and people who want to use the tumbled brick in exterior feature walls. And again, we have somebody that's quite interested in our cosmic brick veneer for a pretty unique project. So we're hoping that one goes through as well. Okay, so this is another case study, again, in Toronto and in Swansea. This is a better case. So not necessarily the best, but better. This was an Ouroboros deconstruction project that came to them really quickly, last minute on Christmas 2024. And it was a huge mansion built out of Credit Valley sandstone with limestone feature stone for the sills and lintels and etc. We worked with them to help with the deconstruction and salvage of the stone specifically. So their team managed the deconstruction and salvage of everything else in the building. And we came and helped with the stone salvage. So we used a combination of equipment and manpower to salvage the stone. And because we weren't using excavators, there was actually a really high yield. So we estimate we got about 85% of the stone from this building. We brought back to our yard in bins, like you can see in the bottom right. And we spent weeks and weeks cleaning, quality grading, sorting the stone. And we had quite a good yield here. The credit value is really, really special stuff. I mean, it's ubiquitous in heritage buildings around the city, but it's getting harder and harder to find. And this stone was in really good condition. It was hand tooled, almost 100 years ago, and so it's been in high demand. So thankfully, we've sold about 2/3 of it already, and most of these have actually gone into heritage projects. And really, the people who've been most interested in this have been other heritage masons because they recognize the value in a historic stone. So we've posted it online, and I think most of the leads came from Facebook Marketplace actually, but it was masons who were looking for something unique to reuse on their projects. So another case study, again, with Ouroboros Deconstruction. This is a project that they hand deconstructed and salvaged last summer. This is the best case scenario by far because it's done slowly, deliberately, carefully. This is the way that deconstruction used to be done before mechanical demolition kind of took over in the mid-century. So here, in this case, there was early involvement. They were sought out by the client to do a hand deconstruction and salvage. So there was buy-in from the beginning. They had time to plan it and had time to execute it. So they weren't rushed on this one. And so because of that, we were able to get a high yield of high quality materials. And you can see these materials down in the bottom right. They're 1890s Victorian, which we quality graded and sorted at our yard to grade from A grade to B grade. The A grade bricks we would reuse in our own projects, and you can see examples of that on the left. And in fact, we did reuse these bricks almost immediately. I think within a week or two, we were rebuilding the facade of a heritage home in Riverdale with bricks from this project on Dundas West. So that's a really great scenario. There's very little cost associated with storage in that case, and it's putting these bricks back into market immediately. So for us, we know that we'll always go out of our way to get Victorian red brick for one because we use it in our own projects, but there's high demand for it across the board. Other masons want it, other homeowners want it. So we'll almost always seek this material out. And as demand is rising, it'll help us to sort of increase the price slowly to improve our prospects. Because again, at the moment, this is a speculative thing that we're doing. We're building the market. Our margins are super low or non-existent, but we have a long-term vision here that we're really willing to see through. So again, this is the best case scenario. Deconstruction, hand deconstruction gives you the best yields and the highest quality material. So moving on again, this is here we go again. This is a project that we are doing currently as we speak. There are teams in Brantford at the Historic Waterworks, and they are salvaging brick from a demolition site, but it's done a little bit differently. And this is an interesting one actually because it's the same demolition contractor that we worked with at the Danforth Baptist Church, but in this case, they reached out to us. So they were already underway on this project. Half of the building was already on the ground when they decided to reach out to us. But they recognized that there was an opportunity here because A, they had a bit more time. They had much more space than they did on the Danforth. So they were able to sort of separate out the material for us in a way that would increase our yield rather than having to drive over it like they did on the Danforth. And they reached out to us to salvage this material and reduce their overall tipping fees for what they would have to pay to dispose of it. We've done a deal with them where we're going to pay them a small fee per brick to salvage this material. And this is really exciting for us because it means that things are working. Like the connections are being made and people are starting to understand the value in the material. Even a demolition, if a demolition contractor can understand the value in a material, that's huge. That means that the mentalities are starting to change. And so this is about 2 weeks in. We're hoping for about a 20,000 plus brick yield from this, with the buff bricks from this 1930 pump house being the sort of highest quality, highest value material for us. But we're also getting a mixture of red bricks and yellow bricks from the interior of the building as well. There's also some exciting stuff happening on this building, which we discovered as it was being demolished. There are hundreds, well, thousands really, but I think our yield is going to be in the hundreds of quarry tiles. And so this is Welsh quarry tile from Ruabon, Wales, which is a well-known terracotta making area. And so these are from 1930. They are 5/8 inches thick by 6x6 tiles. They're super heavy duty. They're beautiful, and we're getting as many as we can before the building is completely demolished. And these will be available for sale on our website soon. So the buff bricks that you see as well in the top right here, they're the building was built in between 1930 and 31, so they're likely built in the bricks are made in the late 1920s. They're really high quality. The building itself was kind of an understated Art Deco building, and we knew that we wanted to get involved with this project, despite it being in Brantford and there being high logistical costs associated with this. Buff brick is another brick similar to the red Victorian that we know that we can move. We can use it in our own projects, and we also know that they're in high demand across the market. So we'll put a lot of effort into a product like this because we can generally command a higher price for it, which makes the whole thing work. And also they're just really beautiful and don't belong in the bin. This leads us to our final poll. Poll number 3. Where do you personally believe that reclaimed masonry products are best reused? Is it A, in heritage restoration, B, in new construction, C, in landscape design, D, interior design, E, reprocess into aggregates, or F, all the above? All the above. Okay, love that. That's great. But again, there aren't really any wrong answers here. This is the approach we're taking for everything. We want to be able to offer these products for anybody that has any use for them, and that means that we're going to prioritize high quality materials always, so that that we can provide that to the market for our own use and then also for others. But we're also going to continually look at alternatives and find more ways to reduce waste, find more ways to make interesting product out of this waste. And that's kind of, I think is one of the most fun parts about this is the future building, really, and the collaboration that comes from that. I think some of the best relationships we've built recently have been with people who have seen what we're doing, are interested, have their own take on what we could be doing, and a conversation starts from there. And we build together, which is really what the relationship between architecture and builders is all about. So some conclusions. For us, it's really important that we get in early. If we are reached out to early on in the process, or in the planning process, especially, it would be ideal. We can then sort of help influence how things can work. So if you know that a building is being redeveloped, if there's going to be a demolition happening, getting deconstruction professionals in early to consult and to price it would really it opens up future opportunities, because if you just rely on traditional mechanical demolition, you're really throwing away a lot of material, but you're throwing away opportunities. So getting involved early for us is really the key. This increased yield, it increases the quality of that yield, and then it positively impacts the viability of the whole project. So if we get A-grade materials, we get a lot of them, that makes it more feasible, more viable for us to do this in the present, but also the future long term. So advocating for deconstruction versus demolition. Demolition is the old way. Again, it's the status quo. It's how things generally get done for many reasons, and those reasons are fast, cheap, and dirty. But there's always a cost to this, right? And I think we're starting to, as a society, recognize these costs, be it climate, be it you name it, like the loss of our built heritage. I think people are starting to recognize more and more these costs and wanting to do something differently. And again, like I mentioned earlier, deconstruction used to be the norm. We used to value materials more. You can find lots of archival photos of deconstruction in Toronto, where, basically before 1930, there would be teams of people taking down buildings by hand, salvaging the material, and those materials went back into the stream. Then they went back into buildings immediately. There's no reason why we can't continue to do that. I mean, there are many reasons why that isn't currently happening, but year over year, as the circular economy grows and this becomes more and more professionalized, I think we're showing people that there are other options. And that's been really exciting to see. So scaling the process is going to be key for this movement to continue, for this to become more viable. And like I mentioned with the Brantford thing, that is us increasing our scale and capacity through collaboration with a demolition contractor. So whereas our yield from the Danforth Baptist Church was in the thousands, but most of those thousands were B-grade tumbled, we're going to get tens of thousands of A-grade brick from this project, which is a huge improvement just 1 year later. And then finally, advocacy. We are far from the only organization doing this work. There are many good people who are really pushing things forward in deconstruction and reuse in Toronto and beyond. And really, we take any opportunity we can to speak to people, stakeholders, people who have skin in the game here that can make a change. And really, this is kind of why I was so excited about this opportunity to speak to the OAA, is that you're people that have a lot of control of how these things go. You might not think it all the time, but you do have a lot of power and influence. And so whether it's just specifying reclaimed materials in your builds or specifying a deconstruction and salvage component of a demolition project, doesn't even have to be a heritage project. It could be just any normal redevelopment. There is always opportunity for deconstruction and salvage. So even if you just put it in the specs or you put it in the tender form, that is a way of kind of pushing things forward. And finally, reaching out to professionals such as ourselves, Ouroboros Deconstruction. There are a number of people that are doing this good work. So collaboration will continue to move things forward. And then we need government to really kind of step up. I'm not waiting around for this anymore. Not like any of us who are doing this work in Ontario. I'm not waiting for Doug Ford to get on board with what we're doing here. But things are changing elsewhere, and we know that this is coming down the line, that eventually there will be mandates for these kinds of things. But we're trying to offer the carrot before the stick comes and be ready when the stick does come. So that's it for my presentation. I think Shalik is going to be reading out the questions, and I'd be happy to answer them.
Yes,
Thank you for
great.
watching.
Thank you so much, Daniel, for that excellent presentation. Yes, we are going to shift into the Q&A portion of the webinar now. I see that there's already quite a few questions ready to go, but if you do have a question, if you haven't yet, please do submit those in our Q&A box, which you usually find at the bottom of your screen. But we'll go ahead and jump in since there's so many questions waiting for you, Daniel. So Okay, so the first question here. So it's John McDonald who has said, if a clay brick was produced locally, it doesn't necessarily follow that its surface weathering characteristics are appropriate. True? Question mark. You need to be careful that reclaimed brick may be inappropriate, or do you need to be careful that reclaimed brick may be inappropriate to meet modern standards for surface weathering performance?
That's a really good question. And the short answer is yes. It's a little more complicated than that, obviously, but typically how we grade our bricks are exterior grade bricks and then interior grade bricks. So in traditional masonry construction, that's mass masonry construction, they would have separated out the exterior grade from the interior grade. So interior grade would have been B and C grade from the kilns. So either underfired bricks or overfired, often underfired. They would have put the B and C grade bricks in the interior withes of the masonry wall because they wouldn't be exposed to the elements like the exterior grade ones were. So that's kind of how it's an important part of our quality grading process. We separate those two bricks. So the exterior grade bricks, as long as they're in good condition, there's no reason why they can't be reused as an exterior grade brick. And we use them every single day in our own restoration projects. Now, if you're using bricks, reclaimed bricks in a modern sort of veneer wall assembly. Again, there's not really any reason why they can't be reused that way, but there are some important design considerations, like basically the fundamentals. Keeping water off of and away from your building is always going to be the best case scenario for longevity of any material, be it historic or modern. So overhangs, proper gutters, stuff like this. Just good detailing, I think, is going to be the most important. But we recognize that there is a sort of a liability, a risk component to reuse of reclaimed materials because they don't have modern testing standards to them. So we are going to be partnering with a building science expert at Toronto Masonry, TMU, Toronto Metropolitan University, to do some quality testing. So freeze thaw, compressive testing, and that's going to allow us to give people some data behind what are some common parameters around these bricks and how they can expect them to perform compared to a modern brick. So that's coming. But again, we use them daily in our own work. But typically because we're using them within a mass masonry wall, a historic masonry wall, and with lime mortar, key. This is key. These bricks were designed to be built typically with a lime mortar. The Danforth Baptist Church was not. It was a Portland mortar, and so that brick can and should be reused with a Portland-based mortar. But 1890s, Victorian era brick. This is historic building materials. They should be reused with a historic compatible mortar. So that's also kind of key.
Okay, and that's actually a great segue because someone has asked a question about mortar. They've asked, how do you get the mortar off the brick, and is this costly?
Yes, it's super costly. Any labor period is costly, right? So that's always our highest overhead in our restoration work, but also in our reclamation work. People need to eat in Toronto, so you have to pay people a living wage to do this work, and it's super labor intensive. So I showed an image earlier on about the brick-to-stick machine. So that machine, it uses a little conveyor to suck a brick into it's got two blades, two diamond blades that remove the mortar quickly and efficiently per brick. So that's really that machine is best used on a harder Portland-based mortar because that mortar is much more difficult to remove by hand. So the old-fashioned way is either hammer and chisel. You can with a lime-based mortar, they're much more brittle. It's easier to remove from the brick. So people get kind of skilled at this. You can clean brick pretty quickly if you're proficient at it. And we've found kind of the best way to do it by hand without using the brick or stick is to set up a little jig on a table, and we use an SDS drill. That's a hammer drill that has a sort of a blade function on it, and we quickly chisel the mortar off the brick. And then we can basically run through thousands of brick a day this way. Each laborer should be able to do about 500 bricks a day. with that method, but provided that it's a lime-based mortar. If it's Portland, it's another story, and that's where things get a little more difficult and costly.
Mm, okay, great. Thanks. Okay, so someone has asked here, or they say, when I propose using salvaged or reclaimed bricks on projects, general contractors and masonry trades have pushed back, citing structural stability and integrity of reused bricks and insist on using new. Is there validity to their concerns, and how would you address them?
Good question. Yeah, and going back to the first question, it's there there can be validity, but I think that it really depends on the application, and the professionals that you're partnering with to build with. So again, if you're specifying a reclaimed brick, but you're not really hiring, you don't necessarily need to hire a heritage mason to build everything, but your mason should understand and value the material. And if they just see it as kind of a nuisance and they think it's old garbage, it's not really a good partnership, right? Like you should be all of these things kind of need to come together. New bricks, there's nothing wrong with new bricks. They have a higher quality standard, perhaps because they are tested and they will conform to modern building code. So from a sort of liability standpoint, there's definitely something to be said about that. But historic bricks, like these buildings have been, sorry, these bricks have been in the wall oftentimes for 140 plus years. And then if as long as like we're doing our job to quality grade and sort those and properly store those materials, there's no reason why they can't be reused again. And another reason why too is that structural masonry is not really common anymore, right? It's almost always just a veneer. So um, the load-bearing capacity of reclaimed bricks doesn't really matter so much anymore. Like these were structural buildings, but if they're being reused in a modern build, it's typically almost always a veneer. Um, so from my perspective, I think the most important thing would be the weathering factor. So a softer clay brick is going to be a little more vulnerable to freeze thaw, and you do see this on heritage buildings that aren't maintained and are protected. Our climate is really, really harsh, and it does degrade everything if you allow it to. So just adequate detailing to protect the masonry from continual and repeated saturation and freeze thaw is going to be the key to any of this. Um, yeah, sorry, I hope that answers the question.
Great. Okay. And you were mentioning grading just now. So we have a question about grading. So someone has asked, what criteria do you use for grading the bricks? Is there a Canadian or other standard used to determine the grading distinctions?
Hmm. That's also a good question. I mean, we're really in kind of the early pioneering stage of this endeavor here in Canada. Like I mentioned, like this is big business in the UK and Australia. I can't speak to the heritage grading of materials in those places. But as far as like a standardized thing in Canada, there's not, it doesn't really exist. Our efforts to kind of do some testing, like I said, freeze thaw and compression testing is going to be a way of professionalizing and building a trust around that, and maybe will eventually become a sort of a standard. But in this case, you're kind of relying on our professionalism and our experience as heritage masons. So we're heritage masons first and foremost. So we work with this material daily and we have for years. So we know it intimately. And so as far as quality grading, you're kind of relying on our professionalism and our expertise in that regard. So that's where we are currently. But where we're going to be in 5, 10 years is going to be a much different place. And so we're working towards basically building up the trust factor that all of you are going to need to be able to specify these materials in at scale.
Great. Okay. We have a nice comment that I thought I might share with you. So this is from Eric Rodriguez. So I think maybe you know or
What's
you're
up,
working
Eric? How
with.
are you? Yeah.
Yes, he said, Daniel, you're a rock star. Such a pleasure hearing you speak about this topic, and I'm excited to work with you on our upcoming project at 137 Roxborough. So
Thanks,
just a
buddy.
nice little comment there. Okay, so we have a question here. I'm not sure maybe if there's a specific answer or maybe a general answer you can give, but they've asked, how much does a salvaged grade A, B, or clinker brick sell for? Asking to get a sense of comparison to just use new.
Good question. Okay, so we're typically currently selling tumbled or B grade at about $1.50 a piece. And this really only just covers our costs, but it's a way for us to stay in the market. And we found, like I said, I've been kind of surprised by the demand here. My colleague Diana she's our creative manager. She's really the one behind this presentation, behind the website, behind anything that looks pretty that we're doing. She's up to. The pricing is all on our website, so we're not hiding any of this. There will be slight modifications and fluctuations in pricing as supply and demand dictates. But typically, we're trying to stay at about the $3 range for an A grade brick, and that is comparable to an Ibstock brick, as I mentioned previously, which is a heritage replica brick that comes from the UK. It's now about $2.95, maybe pushing $3 a piece. So at $3 a brick, we're competitive with that, but you're getting the real thing for that. But really, it's going to depend on the age, the type, how it was sourced, the rarity. We're looking at a project that we're going to have the opportunity to hand deconstruct, not the whole building, but we're going to be able to strip the exterior grade brick from this 1860s farmhouse near Coburg. We're going to put a lot of resources into that. Our labor costs are going to be high, but the brick is gorgeous. It's really special. So typically what we work with in the city is 1890s, 1880s, sort of Victorian era, big building boom in Toronto. They're really kind of ubiquitous. Um, and they're beautiful bricks in their own right, but 1860s is handmade from a local brick producer in the area. You don't see them very often. So we're going to put effort into that, and the price for those is likely going to reflect that.
Great. Okay. Sorry. We have a bit of a longer question here. So Jillian Terrell asks, do you mostly concentrate on deconstruction and resale, or are you involved in construction using salvaged brick? That's part one. And then part two, what are some considerations when planning to insulate slash update the wall assembly when using salvaged brick or retrofitting an existing brick wall? My limited understanding is that this can cause issues for bricks that have otherwise survived decades, that they are that they are used to breathing, and once you add new vapor barriers and insulation, this could accelerate deterioration of existing brick if done improperly. Do you have experience with this? And if so, can you suggest any resources for appropriate wall assemblies?
Yeah, very good question. So to answer the first part, yes, we're building with reclaimed bricks in our own practice at Arcana Restoration daily, be it small repairs or alterations, or often what we get hired to do is to build modern wings on buildings on a historic building, and typically the clients want to be sympathetic about the materials that they're using for that addition. And so we'll build a modern wall assembly with uh, air gap and weepers and the whole deal, but using historic brick. With the key being that we will typically, depending on the quality of the brick, we'll use a lime mortar, even still in this modern assembly, because it's a more compatible building material. And I'm happy to talk about that with anybody if you have more questions. And about the insulation and retrofitting, this is kind of murky territory, and it's a little bit it's a little bit controversial. I mean, I've worked on lots of projects where big single family home in the annex or Rosedale, where they're doing a gut reno, they have the opportunity to do a high energy retrofit, and they'll use spray foam, and you see it often. Spray foam's problematic for lots of reasons. It performs really well. I understand why it gets specified and used, but I kind of think we're seeing the end of spray foam in the next 5, 10 years, where, if you want to look to the future for these types of things, look to the UK, where I think it's being mandated out, and because of all the problems with rot and on retrofits on historic buildings. I won't get into that too deeply, but yes, if you're doing any modern manipulation to a historic wall assembly, you need to be really cautious. And typically, generally speaking, breathable materials are always going to be the best choice because they are compatible with a breathable brick, a breathable lime mortar, and a breathable plaster finish. So all of these buildings were designed to take in moisture and then wick them out over time. A modern wall assembly performs very differently. Obviously, it's a rain screen. It's meant to sort of keep water off of and away from the building and not breathe the same way. So anytime you're trying to mesh those two theories together, there is opportunity for problems. Not always. It really depends on the detailing. But I think just being conscious of that, those two building science theories is really important, understanding them both really well. And as far as resources go with this, like I said, it's kind of murky territory. I took a historic building science course at TMU years ago, and I understood the both things a lot better afterwards, but I still didn't totally understand. So like, what's the consensus here? You know, like what do we believe? And there are historic heritage professionals will believe one thing truly and aren't willing to look at another. And then there are sort of modern building science professionals that maybe they have a different opinion. I think the truth is somewhere in between, but it's always going to come down to detailing and then sort of trying to be as compatible and sympathetic as possible when working with a historic building.
Great, thank you. Someone here has asked, can you speak further about airborne contaminants, metals, toxins that may be trapped or absorbed in historic brick, and whether this is a concern in reuse or cleaning or pulverizing them, etc.?
Definitely. So construction in general is dirty, dangerous work, restoration even more so. We take health and safety really seriously. All of our staff wear 3M ventilators with P100 particulate filters. Um, so yeah, so when we're doing the deconstruction and salvage work, so dust in general, silica dust, we know it's a hazard. There are also potential considerations for other hazards such as asbestos. So we typically won't work on a deconstruction project unless there's been a designated substance survey done, so that we know what we're getting into and that hazardous substances such as asbestos have been taken care of appropriately, abated by professionals before we get in there. Um, I'll just share one anecdote. That's something that happened recently that was new to me. Working on a historic property in Yorkville, and a DSS had been done. It had been gutted before we arrived. Everything was good. But our staff were reporting sort of irritation in their skin, and some of them were actually getting respiratory illnesses. And we're like, what could this be? And we found that the brick on the interior brick withe was really dark, and I just thought it was kind of just general soiling and soot, but it was actually black mold. And the DSS had caught it in the plaster, and it had been abated by the team, but nobody realized that it actually penetrated down into the interior withe of the brick. So once we discovered that, obviously we took action. We increased our PPE, or we put in air scrubbers, and we got the contractors to abate the black mold as best as possible. But really, we're always going to encounter hazards like this, and we just need to deal with it as they come as professionally and thoroughly as possible, so that we're all safe and our clients are safe and the environment and community is safe.
Great, thank you. Celia Young has asked, how do you address owners/clients' concern over long-term maintenance or repair of reuse brick facades?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I think for us, people are coming to us because they want this material, first and foremost. So there's already a buy-in, there's less skepticism. But still, I think they're investing in this product, they're investing in their property, so they want to be reassured. And I think what we tell our clients always is that what we're providing to you is a high quality material that we are vetting ourselves through our own processes and expertise. And then if installed properly, and this is sort of the key, and as I mentioned earlier, with adequate overhangs, protections, good detailing. There's no reason why, and sympathetic mortar is also key because if you use a heritage brick with a non-sympathetic hard Portland mortar, it's just a recipe for disaster. You're going to prematurely degrade that brick. Um, but as long as all of those things are considered and you're working with professionals to build with this material, there's no reason why they can't be reused again and again. I mean, to
Great.
a point, right? To a point. But there are buildings, there are Roman buildings still standing with bricks that are thousands of years old. Mind you, the climates are typically a little bit different than what we experience here in Toronto. Um, but things were built to last. We used to build things that were meant to last hundreds of years, not dozens, right? And that's kind of the value of this material. And that's why we care about it so much is that um, the buildings that we're salvaging them from are typically beautiful and historic, and we get to give them a new life for another 100 plus years, as long as it's done correctly and with care.
Right. Great. Thank you. Um, okay, so they say you mentioned that the Brantford brick reclamation went better in Brantford than at the Baptist Church because the demo contractor was aware of the value. Has anyone approached the city or MOH to flag precious brick removal at the permit stage?
Yeah, so I mean, we're scouring demo permits daily for projects that we think have potential and basically to try and get in early. So even this Brantford project, I said, like they called us when they were already underway. So somebody, at the office thought, oh, maybe there's value here. Maybe we should reach out to Daniel at Arcana to see if we can make this happen. And I had to pivot. Like I was there the next day. We had to drop everything to make this happen, which is like, well, we will do because it's fun and it like builds opportunity. But ideally we get brought in earlier. So we're kind of on our own end, we're doing our own sort of fishing, I guess you call it, or prospecting, because it really is kind of urban mining. So I like to use sort of mining terms when it comes to this sort of thing. So we do a lot of our own prospecting, and that also ends up being sort of advocacy work as well. The more we kind of poke and prod and talk to people, the more opportunity there is to kind of influence things slowly. And the Brantford project is kind of case in point. Like they had a good experience with us on the Danforth Baptist Church. We didn't negatively impact their production. We brought something to the table, so we offered them cost savings when it came to the disposal of this material. And so it leaves a good taste in their mouth. They are now a partner, a potential partner. And so I wanted to bring the same approach to this Brantford one. So they had more space, they had more time. They were open to us coming in and working on site safely, away from their excavators, but in an area that they designated where we could pull bricks from. And we are offering them a reduction in their overall disposal costs and a per brick price. So they get to make a little extra cash. So everybody's incentivized here.
Right. Okay. Um, we have time for some more questions. We can maybe go a minute or so over our time if we need to. So someone has asked here, have you seen a good deconstruction specification? Do you have examples you can share and or do you offer assistance in developing one? Seems this is the start to get, seems this is the start to get this into project requirements, assuming clients can be convinced.
Yeah, great question. I mean, we would love to be brought in as a consultant on any deconstruction, demolition, or heritage project for that matter. So if you have one of these projects, please reach out. I have seen good deconstruction mandates on specifically on heritage projects. Um, so you'll see this kind of only on Part 4 designated heritage projects, or if there is a heritage architect who's trying to sneak it into the package as a way of influencing and trying to get the contractors or the stakeholders to pay attention to this. As far as like it being specified and mandated, like you must salvage these materials. I've only seen it a few times, and again, it's been on sort of high profile designated heritage buildings. And I've been lucky to work on a few of these where we've had the opportunity and the budget to do this. Where yes, it's in the specs, ERA, GBCA, GIMO. They've specified this. You need to do it, and you need to pay us to do it because it's part of the plan. So you do see it. It's becoming more and more common. Thankfully, it's still relatively rare, but just because it happens only on heritage projects doesn't mean it can't happen beyond that, right? So, like I was saying, as far as the advocacy work goes, if there are any architects in the crowd that are interested and want to see what you can get away with, put it in your specs and but don't just dump it there expecting it to happen because you need to sort of incentivize, say this is important because it's a historic material and it's beautiful and it has a reuse capacity, or you want to generally reduce the carbon footprint of your build. Here's how we can do it. Here's one of the ways we can do it. Or you want to reuse these materials on site, either in repair work or as another part of a project, as another wing of the project, or what have you. And we'd be happy to consult in any of those capacities.
Great. So Cindy Randley has asked, do you do any brick tinting to match bricks?
We don't in-house. We do often have to resort to this on several projects. We work with a really talented guy who's an artist, really, to solve problems, basically. Or if, like I said, so here's this photo here on the left. These are uncleaned, or they're cleaned of mortar, but they're uncleaned. They still have patina and carbon buildup on the bricks. There's a range of kind of reds and oranges. These would probably be a perfect match for a heritage restoration in terms of the size and shape of the brick. Typically, historic bricks are a bit longer and taller than a modern brick, and so if you're using a modern brick to make a replacement or repair, you're going to end up with these fat mortar joints. So sometimes, even if we don't have the right color match, we'll prioritize using historic brick because it matches in terms of the size. So it keeps the joint size consistent and it's overall just a general better quality. So this is where we might hire a tinter to come in and tint the bricks so that they blend in better with the wall. So we don't do that in-house because we have a really talented subcontractor that we rely on for that.
Okay, great. Someone has said, thank you for the presentation. How far can you reach out material? Do you cover some specific regions of Ontario? And is there an advantage for a buyer to source any material very locally in terms of budget?
Um, okay, so the first part, we can and do and are traveling for work. There is a sort of a feasibility, viability to that. We have sourced brick from further afield, so in sort of the Windsor, Essex region. We haven't traveled to do deconstruction work there, but we have bought from there. Um, and so, yeah, we will travel if we can make it work financially. We'll go far afield for the right project for sure, and further afield, evidently. And pardon me, can you repeat the second part of that question?
Yes, sorry. Is there an advantage for a buyer to
Mm.
source any material very locally in terms of budget?
I would say yes. I mean, very locally, hyper locally would be from that same project. That's the ideal because you're really reducing the overall, the general overhead of that because you're not having to, bricks are heavy. Even though they're modular, you still have to put them onto a pallet, you have to put them onto a truck, you have to truck it across town, and then you have to store that, and then you have to pick it up. So the fewer times that material moves, the lower the cost can be. So typically we will, if we're working on a large restoration project, will really value those materials and put a lot of effort into salvaging them to reuse them on site. A, because they're the perfect match, but B, because we're not having to go back to take from our inventory at our yard, increasing cost in the process. So as far as cost advantage to client goes, it's tough to say whether a really local product would be more cost effective than one we seek out further afield, or I buy from a supplier further out. Just because generally the overhead is so high, so we're not, like I said over and over, we're not making big profit on this. We're trying to compete with established supply chains. Um, so the answer is yes, but maybe. Um, yeah, sorry, I hope that answers that.
Great. Okay. We can take maybe one or two more questions. So, Jason Grossi has asked, have you paired the compression strength of mortar based on bricks? Often, some historic bricks have very low compressive strength and open porosity, so not matching the mortar can be problematic. Most typical masons are unskilled dealing with lime-based mortars. Have you found ways to address this?
Yeah, I mean, educating the wider public and the wider masonry community, I think has been it's always been rewarding and worthwhile. I've chatted with we're a heritage masonry firm, so we're all well aware and educated about the use of lime mortars and the importance of that. But I'll take any opportunity I get to talk to other masons about lime mortar and why you want to use it. Mostly because I'm just sick of seeing terrible repairs and builds all over the place. People butchering, heritage buildings. And oftentimes it's not that people aren't actively trying to do bad work. They just don't know, right? So if I encounter another mason who's open-minded and interested and doesn't mind having a chat, I'll always try and talk to them about lime mortar and show them what we're doing. Share. There's no secret to this, really. It's just, it's open knowledge, but the more you know, the better you can do your job. So we only use lime mortar in our historic builds. We'll use, modern Portland-based mortars on a modern build using modern materials, but we try to match and be as sympathetic as possible with our brick, stone, and lime mortars, and we'll get really granular and detailed with that. That's part of the fun. But typically, we use for our building lime, we use a pozzolanic hydraulic lime, PHL 3.5. We find that it's got a compressive strength and performance that really closely matches what we typically work with in Toronto. It's also beautiful to work with. It has a nice open porosity. It's way different than NHL, which I think people are starting to realize is not the best material use in all applications. Anyways, I can talk about lime mortar all day. So
Okay, great. And maybe the last question we'll take is, do municipalities, i.e. the City of Toronto, recognize the reuse and salvage of materials as a sustainability incentive, i.e. contributing to Toronto Green Standards or LEED, etc.?
yeah, so this is something that's been pretty exciting for me is that you are starting to see. So the Toronto has a circularity department now. The city of Toronto has a circularity department, which is growing, and that's really exciting to see. They're doing good work. They're going to influence things from within. We are going to be partnering on a really exciting project soon with Waterfront TO, the City of Toronto, and C40 cities, with Half Climate and 3XN as the design team. We're building a pop-up park down in Bidasige, and the design has been completed. The permits have been issued. We're going to get started on that in I think a week or 2 weeks. And this is a fun one because we're going to be using almost all reclaimed materials in the build. A ton of reclaimed materials from our yard, a bunch of reclaimed lumber from Ouroboros's supply, and this is the city and Waterfront TO and C40 bringing this to the fore. So, we're no longer just sort of like screaming into an echo chamber. Like there are sort of some big, important partners who are valuing this and sticking their necks out and working with us to push things forward. So, um, Yeah, this is, I think, only the beginning. I think we're going to see more and more involvement in levels of government who are going to hopefully mandate certain things or at least specify and um, like I said, push things forward from a policy perspective. So we're excited about that.
Great. And I think that's a great note to end on, that there's been some improvements and we're looking ahead, we're optimistic. So that's great. So I know there's quite a few questions that we didn't get to, but hopefully you are able to get in touch with Daniel and Arcana directly. Their email has been posted in the chat. So that's sales@arcanamaterials.co. It's also, of course, on the slide in front of you, along with phone number and other details. So if you have more questions, if we didn't get to your question, please do feel free to reach out to Daniel and the team at Arcana directly. But we will close off for today with just a few closing announcements. So again, I want to extend a huge thank you to Daniel for this excellent presentation, for sharing this important information and these beautiful projects with us. And thank you, of course, to our attendees as well for your engagement. Again, we had a lot of questions, which is great to see. So thanks very much, everyone, for your attendance and your engagement today. So again, a few reminders for those who are seeking continuing education learning hours. The OAA will record your participation in this webinar on your OAA transcript, so there is no need for individual reporting on your part. Just a quick clarification in terms of the timelines. We are working to make sure that your hours are recorded and accredited on your transcript within 4 business days. So I know this is end of cycle time. People are worried about getting their hours recorded, so they will be recorded within 4 business days. Again, all attendees are going to receive a link to the slides for this presentation and also a link to the survey that we send out to submit your feedback for our presenter. So we and our presenters highly value this feedback. If you do get a moment, once you've received the link, we appreciate if you do complete that survey. And finally, a reminder again, as I said, that the 2024-2026 continuing education cycle is coming to a close on June 30th at midnight or 11:59 p.m. And we have just 2 webinars left before then, both of which would count towards your climate action structured hours. So our next webinar takes place tomorrow, Thursday, June 11th, with the title Eco Missing Middle, Streetscape Community High Performance. And then our final webinar before end of cycle takes place on Thursday, June 18th, with the title Innovation in Action at Fanshawe College. And again, these are both climate action webinars. So if you haven't yet completed your mandatory 2 structured climate action hours, be sure to check those out. Okay, great. So with that, I will thank you all once again and thank Daniel once again for this presentation. And I wish you all a pleasant remainder of your day. Thanks very much.
Thanks, everyone.